So our next big topic and our next big piece of understanding fitness, this is going to be the gateway into a lot of our chronic diseases. It's going to be trying to understand obesity, and obesity in the context of body composition. Okay, what is the chemical and physical makeup of your body? We all weigh a certain amount, but what that is that you're made up of is going to have some kind of profound health effects on things, whether you have more water or muscle and protein or adipose tissue, kind of what it is that you're made up of is going to have these profound effects. Okay? Why is this not working? There we go. So we need to define body comp first. We need to understand what it is and what it isn't, okay, as we get into this. So it is the quantification of the chemical or anatomical makeup of your body, right? And so anatomically, that may be a tissue-specific thing, right? Fat, muscle, bone, tendons, ligaments, that type of stuff. Chemically, it is all the way down to, are you water? How much water do you have? How much calcium do you have? How many amino acids do you have, right? We can take it all the way down onto that. And so one of the real kind of significant pieces of body composition and why it is in some ways considered especially a health-related component of physical fitness is that your body composition right now is an indicator of your nutritional status. It's an indicator of energy balance. Okay? You weigh what you weigh, and your body composition is what it is because of the balance between the food that you're eating, the amount and type of food that you're eating, and your body's daily kind of caloric needs. Okay? And so on a very basic level, people that are in a positive energy balance, you're taking in more than what you need, are going to tend to gain weight, and very often how that weight is going to be gained, depending upon other things, will be distributed either into muscle tissue or into adipose tissue. Okay? People that are in a negative energy balance, you're consuming fewer calories a day than your body needs, you're going to tend to lose weight. And then based upon what you're eating and what else you're doing, where you're going to lose that weight, be it from water or muscle or adipose tissue or something, is also very dependent. We'll talk a little bit about those things towards the end of the class. Okay? It's an indicator of nutritional status. So people that have poor nutritional status, either by I don't eat enough, therefore I'm losing weight, or I eat too much, which is the bigger problem in kind of folks that are y'all's age and my age and probably your parents' age. Then you're either going to potentially lose too much weight and kind of lose muscle mass and things, and that can be a problem, or you're going to tend to gain adipose tissue, and that has its own side effects. Okay? And then for a host of other reasons, body composition tends to be related to health status and overall well-being. Some of this is related to purely physical well-being. Okay? People that have excess body fat tend to be at a greater risk of developing cardiovascular disease, especially at a greater risk of developing type 2 diabetes and certain kinds of cancers. Okay? And also, it can exacerbate some kinds of pulmonary issues, some kinds of lung issues. Okay? All of these things in the context of stuff that matters today. Okay? If you have excess body fat, you are going to be at a significantly higher risk of having worse complications of COVID, okay? Because of its interactions with lots of other things. And then I also don't want to gloss over, when we say overall well-being here, there can be some very profound effects of body composition on mental state and mental well-being, okay? On levels of anxiety, and depression, and self-esteem, and that is not always related purely around what you guys might think of, okay? It is not just people that are maybe obese that have poor self-esteem and feel bad about the way that they look. Lots of people don't. It's great. Okay? There are eating disorders that are going to come into in the midst of all of this. People that have a very poor mental health based upon wanting to have very low body fat or wanting to have large amounts of muscle mass or having some sort of what we call body dysmorphia, where they don't perceive their body composition, whatever it is, as being potentially desirable or what they would like for it to be. And so we see lots of things in the midst of all of this that are related to body composition. Right? Anorexia, bulimia, okay, we're going to fall into that as well as some self-esteem. Okay. The other important thing to keep in mind here, and this will become very apparent when we do the limited things that we can do as part of our lab on this, is that we have to make a distinction between body size and actual body composition. Okay? And you may think that that seems really, really obvious, but it is a little more complicated. Okay? So when I talk about body size, we're speaking directly of height and body mass or weight. Okay? Are you short or tall for your age and your sex? Okay? Do you weigh a lot, or do you weigh very little, or do you weigh right at the average for someone that is your height and your age and your sex? Okay? When I say body size, though, as it relates to composition, when we're talking about obesity, what we really are talking about is something called the body mass index, or BMI. BMI is going to be your weight in kilograms divided by your height in meters squared. Okay? So BMI is the one measure. Okay? When we talk about defining people as being obese or overweight and how that correlates to poor health outcomes, all of our data, almost all of our data on the poor health outcomes of excess body fat, we are inferring from BMI. Okay? So there are BMI cutoffs. 25 and over is overweight, 30 and over is obese. We're going to make an assumption that if you have a higher BMI, you most likely have higher levels of adipose tissue. Okay? But that's not always going to be the case. BMI makes no distinction between what we might call overweight for your height and what we might call over fat for your height or over adipose tissue for your height. I use the term fat and adipose tissue very much interchangeably. It is not a word designed to have any connotations on a particular composition. I mean it simply as defining sort of adipose tissue or lipid tissue that we typically call that fat tissue. Okay? So you can take a person, okay, and body fatness or the percentage of your body that is made up of adipose tissue and BMI are only very weakly related. They're very weakly related. Right? And the relationship between BMI and actual measures of body fatness or percentage of your tissue that is lean and the percentage that is adipose tissue is going to be very different between young people and old people. It's going to be different between men and women. And it is especially going to be different between people that have done lots of weight training versus those that have not done weight training. People that have done a lot of weight training and have lots of muscle mass. Okay? Muscle weighs more than fat. Muscle is more dense than fat. And so you look at, and this has been a big issue in sort of this basketball players and the football players getting kind of back out and playing with COVID. If you look, you take, say, a typical NFL defensive back who might be 5'10" or thereabouts and might weigh 205 pounds. They're almost exclusively muscle, right? Very, very little body fat. And yet their BMI is right on the borderline of being defined as being obese. Okay? They are not obese, but they have a lot of muscle. And so BMI does not make that distinction. Okay? older people tend to have less muscle and more adipose tissue than young people. And so the BMI, kind of height versus weight, is off. The body composition that underlies a certain BMI in old and young people is going to be a little bit different as well. Similarly for men and for women. Okay? As we'll see as we move along, ladies, you all tend to have, because of the wonders of childbirth, you all tend to have more body fat on a basal level than men do. Okay? It's just the way that it is. And then we'll talk kind of about what those numbers are. So we have large amounts of data on the relationship between BMI and health outcomes because it's easy, right? I can call Jenna on the phone or I can send Jenna an email and she can tell me, Dr. Black, here's my height, here's my weight. Yes, I'm a type 2 diabetic, or no, I'm not a type 2 diabetic. She doesn't have to come to the lab. I don't have to actually measure anything as long as she's being honest. So we have lots of data on this in health outcomes. We have very little data on actual physical direct measures of body composition. You are 5'10" and 150 pounds, and you have 12% body fat, and that is going to be related in some ways to this risk of cardiovascular disease or diabetes. Very little data on that. Okay? So keep that in mind. As we move ahead, keep that in mind. Okay. So here's my somewhat anthropomorphized ideas of body mass index in sort of guys, right? Here we have normal body mass index is lower than 25. I like to say, here's Dr. Black in high school and college. Here's Dr. Black in graduate school. Here's Dr. Black now. So under 25 is considered normal. That's independent of age, independent of sex, okay? 25 to 29.9 is going to be considered overweight, okay? And then anything at 30 or above is going to be considered obese. All right, that's kind of what we're looking at from all of these things. Here's an example, okay? Here we have a guy who is 5'11" and weighs 220 pounds. He has 5% body fat. He would be a bodybuilder, okay? Very, very little adipose tissue. Here we have a 5'11" sedentary man who also weighs 220 pounds. And their BMIs are absolutely identical. Their BMIs are both 30.7. So by BMI, they are both obese. Okay? If we look though, body composition, only 5% of his body weight is adipose tissue. This guy's is 30. And you can look then, so he's got a lot of muscle. His basal metabolic rate is almost 2,500 calories per day. This gentleman who has much less muscle and much higher percentage of adipose tissue, his basal metabolic rate is only about 1,900 calories per day. Right? So that's going to be the thing that we've got to keep in mind. That's the individual distinction that BMI doesn't give. Right? It treats everybody as the same. It's a terrible measure, except for not making it, right? And our other measures are kind of hard to get at. Okay, so here's what we're going to have is we're going to call sort of a relatively kind of healthy body composition in most people. Okay, we've got guys here on the left, we've got women on the right. Remember, I was telling you all that in general, women have a higher percentage of body fat than men. You will note, if you look at other organs, right, bone tissue, basically the same. We have what's called non-essential fat and then essential fat. So we estimate that essential fat in men is about 3% and in women it is about 12%. We don't know for sure what a level of essential fat is, because to know, I would have to starve all of you until it kills you and figure out what your body fat percentage dipped under to be like, okay, we got rid of the essential fat, so you die, right? No one wants to volunteer for that particular experiment in that way. So we're guessing that in men it's about 3%, and in women it's about 12%, okay? And then we have this idea of what's called non-essential fat. And so this is in kind of a sort of average, typical kind of college-age person, about 12% in men and about 15% in women. So if you add those together, kind of a normal, relatively healthy, average college-age male may be at about 15% body fat, and a college-age woman may be at about 27% body fat. Okay? So if you see something on TV, we don't get it as much anymore, and they talk about that there are these athletes and these guys like, oh, he has 2% body fat. No, he doesn't. He does not have 2% body fat. Okay? It's very, very low. It's practically negligible. But really, if it was under 3, that's not really a possible kind of thing. Men who are under 10% body fat basically have no body fat. Okay? Women that are under 20% body fat, measured by DEXA, which we'll talk about later. Women that are under 20% body fat have basically no body fat whatsoever. Okay? I have her permission to, but I should have pulled up a picture. One of my former PhD students, she was a soccer player in college, and on the DEXA, she has, it's like 19.8% body fat. And if you look at her, like she's the leanest, like skinniest, looks like a marathon runner kind of person that you've ever seen. And you're like, she has 20% body fat? And the answer is yes, she does. And that just illustrates that basically women, if you're near and around 20, you have almost what we would think of as basically no extra body fat whatsoever. You know, it's super duper. Okay? But women that get under, they get kind of down under about 15%, and they're starting to get close to eating into near this essential level of fat, women will become amenorrheic, your period will stop, okay? It will become very intermittent, and then there's something called the female athlete triad. It's going to be associated with those things. So there's some really kind of poor health outcomes in women that get kind of down very, very close-ish to having no non-essential body fat. Okay? Guys, there seems to be a little less out of all of that as you kind of get very, very, very lean, kind of out of this non-essential body fat. It's going to be there. So just kind of keep that in mind. And I say all of that because I'm going to have you guys use one of our not super accurate, but at least it's a usable measure of body composition. And people will do that, and it will be just as often guys as it will be women who will do it and think, wow, this seems like I have a lot more than what I thought I was going to have. And what I just want you guys to appreciate is that, you know, 15% in men is pretty average and pretty lean, right? Like if you're in the mid to high 20s as a woman, you're pretty darn lean. You don't have kind of a lot of potentially extra adipose tissue. So everybody kind of keep those things in perspective. Okay? Questions about all of it? No? Okay. Liz is nodding her head no, but she has her arms folded very sort of like in the midst of those things. Okay. All right, wait. Trigger warning. Sorry, there's about to be a dissected animal on here. I always forget this. So if that's going to cause you problems, like it would my wife, just close the eyes. Right? So the best way. So if BMI is not a good way to assess body composition, how can we do it? Okay. Well, the single best way, the single most accurate way to learn about what it is that you are made up of is through what we would call a direct measure, which is an anatomical dissection. Okay? What you guys did in anatomy here. You take the cadaver, you peel off the individual tissues, we weigh out each individual tissue. You can then chemically dissolve each individual tissue and figure out how much did it weigh, how much of the muscle was water, how much of it was protein, et cetera, et cetera. And we do that for every tissue in the body, and we can then get an estimate of what were you actually made up of. Okay? So that's called a direct measure. That's the only direct measure of body composition is an anatomical dissection. That would be direct, it would be the most accurate. But obviously, we're never going to do that, right? Kayla's not going to let me dissect her right now, right, in the midst of everything. That's not a very feasible kind of thing for us to do. So that's how we could do it. And so I will talk about our other, what we call indirect measures here in a few minutes. And what has happened is that there is a set number of cadavers that have been dissected. Okay? and they are thought to be representative of different age groups, different body composition groups, and those things. And they've taken the cadavers, they've dissected them, we know what their actual composition is. And then they've used our indirect measures that we will talk about on those cadavers or on those people before they passed away. And we're then going to use what their real value was to help us validate our indirect measures. Okay? And so that's how we know that skin folds work in the way that they do. The biological impedance works in the way that things. It's been validated against these cadavers. Okay? So, if we look at indirect measures, let's see what time it is. Okay? We'll do one of these and then we'll take a break. Okay? Several of our indirect measures. So what indirect in this instance means is that I am not specifically going to cut out and look at and weigh out your muscle tissue. Or I'm not specifically going to siphon off the water in your plasma or in your cytoplasm or something and measure out how much that is. Okay? Indirect means it's an estimate. I'm going to estimate what you are made up of based upon some other measurement that I can make. Okay? And so one of the ways that we do this, one of the underlying principles of several of our indirect measurements is going to be this idea called densitometry. Okay? Densitometry is going to be based upon body density. And body density is going to be defined as your mass or your weight divided by your volume. Okay? So we know and we can measure that different components of your body have different densities. Muscle has a certain density. Bone has a certain density. Water has a certain density, as does adipose tissue. And so if we can make a measurement of the density of your entire body, we can then use that to guess at the combination of water and muscle and bone and fat that would be necessary in your body to give you the overall body density. Does that make sense? You guys understand that as a concept, okay? And so that leaves us then with, well, how do we measure your body density? I wanted to know Emily's body density. I can get her mass pretty easily, right? I can put you on a scale, I can weigh you, I can learn your body mass. That's not a problem. The place that becomes the problem is, how do we measure your body volume? Okay? How do we measure your body volume? One of the ways that we can get at that is through something called Archimedes' principle. And Archimedes' principle is this idea that when you submerge something in water, whatever your volume is, you're going to displace a roughly equal amount of volume of water based upon what you are. Okay? And then additionally, kind of what happens whether you float or sink is going to also be in direct relation to your density. So maybe some of you have had this experience. You fill the bathtub up too much. You get in the bathtub, the water level rises, right, and maybe it sloshes over or it goes into the extra thing. So lots of bath things you got to think about. We have to give Ellis a bath pretty much every night now because she gets really, really dirty. We don't really understand. Okay? And so that would be one way for us to try to assess and try to calculate what your body volume is by looking at how much water you're displace. Okay? And so if you look at all of this, this is a kind of a rough estimate here. So imagine that this piece of muscle weighs 5 pounds and this piece of adipose tissue also weighs 5 pounds. You will note that that piece of adipose tissue that weighs 5 pounds occupies a lot more space, a lot more volume than the muscle does. So the muscle is more dense. Its mass per its actual area is higher than the adipose tissue. Okay? The density of adipose tissue is less than the density of water, which means adipose tissue floats in water. Muscle and bone are more dense than water, so they want to sink when you get in water. Okay? So your ability to float in water is based upon how much adipose tissue. All right, let us stop there, and we can take a break until 12:05. Okay, until 12:05.